"Ma'am," he said, his voice loud enough to carry over the din, drawing the attention of the nearby tables. "I think you're in the wrong place. The dependent and retiree seating is over by the west entrance." Peggy looked up from her plate, her gaze calm. Her long silver-white hair was pulled back in a neat, practical bun. Her eyes, the color of a stormy sea, held his without wavering. She was wearing a civilian outfit, a bright red tweed jacket that was utterly out of place among the sea of green and tan digital camouflage. "I'm fine right here, thank you, Marine," she said, her voice quiet but clear. The Lance Corporal Davis exchanged a look with his friend on the right, who snickered. The third one looked a little less sure, his eyes darting around at the other Marines who were now openly watching. "No, ma'am, I don't think you are," Davis pressed on, his tone shifting from patronizing to accusatory. "This area is for active duty personnel during the lunch rush. It's a rule. We have to maintain standards." Peggy placed her fork down gently beside her plate. Her hands, wrinkled and weathered, were perfectly still on the table. There was a story in those hands, in the faint silvery lines of old scars and the prominent knuckles. But Davis wasn't the kind of young man to read it. "I'm aware of the standards, Lance Corporal." The quiet authority in her tone seemed to irritate him. It was a challenge to his self-appointed role as guardian of the chow hall. He saw a lost old woman in a ridiculous red jacket, not a peer, not a veteran, just an obstacle. His friend Miller nudged him. "Guess she's a little confused, Davis. Better help her out." That was all the encouragement he needed. Davis's lips curled into a smirk. "You're right. Sometimes our seniors get a little turned around. Let me make this clear for you." He tilted the cup. A stream of cold water splashed directly onto Peggy's plate. It flooded the mashed potatoes, turned the gravy into a murky soup, and soaked the bread roll into a pulpy mess. A collective gasp went through the nearby tables. Several Marines started to rise, outrage flashing in their eyes, but they froze, unsure of the protocol for confronting one of their own, who was technically trying to enforce a rule, however brutally. The chow hall, which had been buzzing with 100 conversations, fell into a deep, echoing silence. The only sound was the drip of water from Peggy's tray onto the linoleum floor. Peggy Whitaker did not flinch. She didn't cry out or yell. She simply watched the water pool on her ruined lunch, her expression unreadable. Her stillness was absolute, a rock in the middle of a suddenly turbulent stream. It was a different kind of strength than the young men around her understood. It wasn't born of muscle and aggression, but of immense time-forged control. Davis mistook this profound calm for frailty, for the defeated shock of an old woman being publicly shamed. He felt a surge of power. "See? Now maybe you'll listen. There are rules on a Marine Corps base. This is our child hall. You have to respect that." He gestured dismissively at a bright red jacket. "You can't just wander in here like it's a golden corral." "It's about respect for the uniform." Peggy slowly raised her eyes from the tray to his face. "Respect is earned, Lance Corporal. It isn't a feature of a building." The challenge in her voice, still quiet, still controlled, was unmistakable. It lit a fire in Davis's eyes. He felt his authority, his very identity as a Marine, being questioned by this civilian, this woman. He had to reassert control. He had to win. "You want to talk about earning it?" he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. He pointed a finger at her chest, at a small, tarnished pin on the lapel of her jacket. It was shaped like a bomb with 2 lightning bolts behind it and a shield in the center. To him, it was just a piece of cheap, corroded metal. "What's that supposed to be? Something you picked up at the PX gift shop to look impressive? Some kind of knockoff your husband got you?" The pin was dull, its details obscured by years of wear. The silver plating had been rubbed away in a dozen places, revealing the darker metal beneath. It looked old, forgotten. As his finger jabbed toward the pin, the fluorescent lights of the chow hall seemed to fade away, replaced by the blinding, white-hot glare of an Iraqi sun. The smell of bleach and old food vanished, replaced by the acrid, metallic tang of cordite and sun-baked dust. Peggy was no longer in a mess hall in North Carolina. She was outside Fallujah,
sweat stinging her eyes, her hand steady inside a thick blast suit as she stared at the intricate pressure plate of an IED buried in the road. The pin, brand new and shining, was on the uniform of the master sergeant standing over her. "Just breeze, Whitaker. Easy does it." The tarnished spot on the shield was where a piece of shrapnel from a secondary device had struck it, saving the flesh just beneath. The memory vanished as quickly as it came, leaving her back in the cold, silent room with a young Marine's arrogant face inches from hers. "I asked you a question," Davis demanded, his voice rising. "Are you even authorized to be on this base without an escort? Let me see your ID." Peggy's hand moved with deliberate slowness toward the lanyard around her neck, tucked beneath her jacket. She pulled out her identification card. It wasn't a dependent ID. It wasn't a retiree card with a green stripe. It was a standard common access card, the same kind Davis had. He snatched it from her hand. His eyes scanned it, his brow furrowing in confusion. The card looked old, the photo showing a much younger Peggy Whitaker, her face taut and serious in a set of digital camouflage utilities, a fierce determination in her eyes. The listed rank made him pause. Muggy G.C., Master Gunnery Sergeant. It was an enlisted rank, but one so high it was practically mythical to a lance corporal. It was the summit of a career, a rank held by only the most experienced, most expert 1% of the Marine Corps. But the card was also expired by 6 months. Davis let out a short, triumphant laugh. "Expired?" he announced to the room. "Figures. This is an expired ID. You're not active. You're not even a proper retiree yet, apparently. Just an old woman using an old card to get a free lunch." He tossed the ID onto the soggy tray. "This is it. I'm calling the MPs. We'll get you escorted off base. Maybe a little chat with them will remind you about the rules." He was reveling in it now, the righteous fury of a rule follower who had caught a violator red-handed. He had been right all along. She was a fraud. Across the room, standing near the beverage station, First Sergeant Evans had seen the whole thing unfold. He was a career EOD technician, a man who had seen his share of combat in both Iraq and Afghanistan. When the commotion started, he'd been annoyed. When the lance corporal poured the water, he'd been angry.
But when he saw the woman's face, a flicker of something, a ghost of a memory from a PME class years ago stirred in his mind. Then he saw the close-up view of the pin on her lapel. As the kid jabbed at it, his blood ran cold. It wasn't just any EOD pin. It was the old design, the pre-2000s model, and the way it was worn, the specific tarnish. He knew the stories. Every EOD tech in the Marine Corps knew the stories. They were legends, the founding figures of their small, insane community. He looked again at the woman's face, at the silver hair and the sea-gray eyes that held a fire he recognized. The name from the old articles and award citations clicked into place in his brain. Whitaker. Peggy Maggie Whitaker. A feeling of absolute dread washed over First Sergeant Evans. He fumbled for his phone, his hand shaking slightly. He didn't dial the MPs. He scrolled through his contacts to a number he rarely used, a number that connected him to the highest enlisted Marine on the entire East Coast. He stepped outside, his heart pounding. The phone was answered on the second ring. "Rivera." The voice was gravelly, impatient. "Sergeant Major," Evans said, his voice tight. "This is First Sergeant Evans with 2nd EOD Company. Sir, you need to get down to the 2nd MAF Chow Hall right now." "What is it, First Sergeant? A brawl?" "Worse, Sergeant Major, much worse," Evans said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "There's a lance corporal in here trying to get Master Gunnery Sergeant Peggy Whitaker arrested." There was a dead silence on the other end of the line. For a full 5 seconds, the only sound was static. Then the base sergeant major's voice came back, no longer gravelly, but sharp as forged steel. "Say that name again, First Sergeant." "Whitaker, sir. Master Gunnery Maggie Whitaker." The line went dead. Evans knew he didn't need to say another word. The cavalry wasn't just on the way, it was already breaking the sound barrier. Inside the Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps Base Camp Lejeune's office, Sergeant Major Carlos Rivera stared at his phone as if it had physically struck him. He was a bull of a man with a chest full of ribbons that told the violent history of the last 30 years,
but his face had gone pale. "Whitaker," he breathed. He turned to his desk terminal, his thick fingers flying across the keyboard with a speed that defied their size. He pulled up the Marine Corps Total Force System, typing in the name. The file that appeared on the screen was more of a monument than a service record. Whitaker, Peggy M., rank Master Gunnery Sergeant, MOS 2336, Explosive Ordnance Disposal, Technician. A list of commendations scrolled down the page. Bronze Star with Combat V, Purple Heart, Navy and Marine Corps Combination Medal with 3 gold stars, Combat Action Ribbon with 2 stars. She was one of the first women to ever graduate from the Naval School of Explosive Ordnance Disposal as a United States Marine, the first to lead an EOD team in a combat zone, the first to achieve the rank of Master Sergeant, then Master Gunnery Sergeant in that field. Her deployment history was a litany of hellscapes: Desert Storm, Somalia, Iraq, Afghanistan. Rivera's eyes fell on a specific citation summary, one he'd heard recounted in hushed, reverent tones at NCO gatherings for years. The Romani Daisy Chain, 2006, a complex multi-stage ambush involving a vehicle-borne IED and 6 secondary pressure plate devices designed to kill the first responders.
Then, Gunnery Sergeant Whitaker had spent 4 hours under sporadic sniper fire, disarming every single one of them by hand after her team's robot was disabled. She had saved the entire platoon that had been cordoned inside the blast radius. She wasn't just a veteran, she was a foundational pillar of modern Marine Corps EOD. "Oh, sweet mother," Rivera whispered. He slammed his hand on his intercom. "Gunny, get me the base commander. Tell him it's a code red situation, and get my vehicle now." He grabbed his cover from its stand, his movements sharp, precise, and filled with a terrifying urgency. The young Marine who had sounded the alarm wasn't exaggerating. This wasn't worse than a brawl. This was sacrilege. Back in the chow hall, the atmosphere was thick with a tension that could be cut with a K-bar. Lance Corporal Davis, feeling the weight of 100 pairs of eyes on him, was doubling down. The silence was unnerving him, and he filled it with more aggression. "What's the matter, ma'am?" he taunted, seeing Peggy's distant gaze. "Forgot the procedures for getting a new ID? These things are too old to be valid anyway. They probably didn't even have the chips in them when this was issued. You probably don't even remember half the current regulations." He was pushing past redemption, digging his own hole deeper with every word. He puffed out his chest, wearing an old pin, using an old ID. "It's fraudulent, it's stolen valor is what it is, and we don't tolerate that in our Corps." The accusation hung in the air, obscene and unbelievable. Stolen valor. He had accused Peggy Whitaker of faking the one thing she had given her entire soul to. Just as he opened his mouth to call the Provost Marshal's office himself, a new sound cut through the silence. It wasn't the loud wail of MP sirens, but the insistent professional chirp of command vehicles pulling up outside. The doors to the chow hall burst open. The entire room seemed to snap to attention as one. A wave of motion rippled from the entrance as Marines shot to their feet, their posture rigid. Framed in the doorway was Sergeant Major Rivera. He was 6'3" of pure, unadulterated authority. His digital camouflage uniform so heavily starched it looked like it could stop a bullet. At his side was the base commander, a full colonel whose face was a thundercloud of controlled fury. Behind them were 2 other master sergeants and a young female captain, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and awe. The procession moved through the parted sea of Marines like a warship cutting through water. They did not stop to ask questions. They moved with a singular, unalterable purpose, their eyes locked on the small table in the center of the room. Davis felt the blood drain from his face. His bravado evaporated, replaced by a cold, sickening dread. He had never seen the base sergeant major in person, let alone the base commander. They didn't come to chow halls for lunch. Their presence meant something had gone catastrophically, apocalyptically wrong, and they were walking directly toward him. Sergeant Major Rivera stopped 3 feet from the table.
He completely ignored Davis and his two stunned friends, his gaze fixed solely on the old woman in the red tweed jacket. He saw the ruined plate of food. He saw the expired ID lying in the gravy. He saw the tarnished EOD pin on her lapel. His back went ramrod straight. He raised his right hand in the sharpest, most flawless salute of his 30-year career. The snap of his hand hitting his cover echoed in the dead-silent room. "Master Gunny Whitaker," Rivera's voice boomed, filled with a profound respect that bordered on reverence. "Sergeant Major Rivera, it is an honor to have you on my base. I sincerely apologize for the welcome you have received." The colonel next to him executed an equally sharp salute. "Ma'am, Colonel Jensen, welcome to Camp Lejeune." A collective audible gasp swept the room. The title, Master Gunny, the salutes, the difference, it was all so wrong, so completely inverted from the scene they had just witnessed. Lance Corporal Davis's world was tilting on its axis. His mouth hung open, a strangled noise caught in his throat. Rivera held his salute, his eyes locked on Peggy's. "I was a Lance Corporal in boot camp when you were already a staff sergeant, ma'am. We studied your render safe procedure on the M1A1 mine in the schoolhouse. It's still in the manual." He lowered his salute and took a step closer. He looked around the room, his eyes burning holes in every Marine he saw. Then he looked back at Peggy, his voice softening but still carrying to every corner of the chow hall. "For those of you who don't know who you're looking at," he began, his voice a low growl of controlled rage and profound respect, "this is Master Gunnery Sergeant Peggy Whitaker. She didn't just serve, she built the ground the rest of us walk on. She was the first woman in Marine Corps history to earn that EOD badge." He pointed at the tarnished pin on her jacket. "She earned it when most of the people in this room were in diapers. She earned it again in the sands of Kuwait during Desert Storm. She earned it in the streets of Mogadishu." His voice grew louder, each word a hammer blow of truth. "And in 2006 in Romani, when an entire platoon was trapped in a kill zone, surrounded by 6 IEDs, Gunny Whitaker spent 4 hours on her belly under fire, disarming every single one of them by hand. She did that when women weren't allowed in combat roles. She didn't get a memo telling her she was in combat. She was too busy winning it." The young Marines in the room stared, their faces a mixture of shame and absolute awe. They were looking at a ghost, a legend from the history books, sitting right there in a red jacket, her lunch soaked in water. The young female captain behind the colonel was crying silently, tears tracking down her cheeks. She was standing there in her uniform because of the woman at that table. Rivera finally turned his gaze upon Lance Corporal Davis. The sheer, concentrated pressure of that look made Davis physically recoil. "You," Rivera hissed, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level, "you who swore an oath to the same corps this warrior dedicated her life to. You stood here and spoke of standards. You spoke of respect. You know nothing of either." The colonel stepped forward. "Lance Corporal Davis," he said, his voice flat and cold as a morgue slab, "your actions today are a disgrace to that uniform, to this base, and to the legacy of every Marine who has ever served. You didn't see a master gunnery sergeant. You saw an old woman. You chose ignorance over observation. You chose arrogance over respect. That is a failure not just of character, but of the fundamental duties of a United States Marine. You and your friends will report to my office in 10 minutes. Your careers are now under my personal review." Davis couldn't speak. He could only stand there, trembling, as the weight of his colossal mistake crushed him. Then a quiet voice cut through the tension. "Sergeant Major?" All eyes turned to Peggy. She had risen slowly from her chair, her posture as straight and unyielding as ever. She looked not at Davis, but at the crowd of young faces watching her. "The Lance Corporal made a mistake," she said, her voice steady and clear. "A grievous one, but he's not entirely wrong.
Standards are important. The problem isn't the standard, it's the application. You apply it with your eyes, not with your assumptions. She looked down at her own wrinkled hands, then back up at the young Marines. Experience doesn't expire with youth. Gray hair doesn't mean you've gone soft. It means you've survived things that broke other people. It means you've learned. The uniform is a symbol, but the warrior is the person inside it. Never forget to look at the person. Look for the warrior in everyone. As she spoke about survival, about what it took to endure, the memory of the pin flared in her mind one last time, this time in full, vivid detail. She wasn't just on her belly in the dirt of Ramadi. She was clipping the last wire on the 6th device. The sniper fire had picked up, rounds cracking inches above her helmet. Her hands weren't shaking. They moved with the fluid, practiced grace of a surgeon. The final snip, the deadening silence as the circuit broke. Her team leader, a master sergeant named Gunner Dave, had pulled her to her feet, his face streaked with grime and relief.
He'd taken the EOD pin from his own collar, the one he'd been awarded in Beirut. "This is yours now, Maggie," he grunted, pinning it on her flak jacket. "You didn't just earn it today, you defined it." She touched the tarnished pin on her lapel. A small, sad smile graced her lips. It was a lesson learned in fire and blood, one she was now passing on in the quiet of a Masal. The fallout was swift and decisive. Lance Corporal Davis and his friend Miller were processed for administrative separation. Their colossal failure in judgment was deemed incompatible with continued service. The third Marine, who had shown hesitation, was given a lesser but still careering punishment and assigned to remedial training on customs courtesies and Marine Corps history. Colonel Jensen ordered a base-wide stand-down. Every unit was required to conduct training focused not just on sexism or ageism, but on the broader concept of professional observation and institutional heritage. The story of Peggy Whitaker in the Chow Hall became an instant, indelible part of Lejeune's lore, a cautionary tale and a source of renewed pride. The base sergeant major himself led the first NCO professional development session, using a picture of Peggy's tarnished EOD pin as his primary slide. A week later, Peggy was at the base commissary, pushing a shopping cart down the cereal aisle. She was back in her civilian clothes, though this time it was a simple blue blouse and jeans. A hesitant voice called her name. "Ma'am, Master Gunny Whitaker." She turned to see a young man in civilian clothes, his shoulders slumped, his face pale. It was Davis. He was holding a gallon of milk, but he looked like he was carrying the weight of the world. "I just wanted to," he started, his voice cracking. "I wanted to apologize. What I did, there's no excuse."
I was arrogant, and I was stupid, and I was wrong. I'm sorry. The apology was raw, earnest, and stripped of all the bravado she had seen before. He was just a kid who had made a terrible, life-changing mistake. Peggy looked at him for a long moment, her sea-gray eyes studying his face. She saw the shame, but she also saw a flicker of something else, the faint beginnings of humility. She gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Apology accepted, Mr. Davis." She didn't call him Lance Corporal. They both knew he wouldn't be one for much longer. "I don't get it," he said, his voice a low murmur. "Why weren't you angry? Why didn't you scream at me? You could have." Peggy picked a box of Cheerios from the shelf and placed it in her cart. "When your job is to walk toward the things everyone else is running from, you learn to control your emotions," she said simply. "Anger is a luxury. It's heavy. You can't afford to carry it. You carry your tools, your training, and your team. Nothing else." She pushed her cart past him, but paused. "Look closer next time, son," she said without turning around. "The most dangerous things in this world are often the ones you overlook." She continued down the aisle, leaving him standing there with his gallon of milk, a young man who had learned the hardest lesson of his life, not from a drill instructor's roar, but from the quiet, unshakable dignity of a legend. If you were moved by this story of courage and resilience, please like and share this video.
Subscribe to She Chose Valor to honor our veterans and hear more stories of the incredible women who have served this nation in uniform.